Guy. They should have warned you.
We're former colleagues. We do high fives.
There you go. We're getting a little closer. Oh, that's right. I almost took her job away. My goodness. Okay, I don't need it. You can put it away. Go put it away, and then you can start. Now I'll hold it.
Good morning. My name is Khadijah Peak, and I am the Committee Director for the Senate Banks Committee. We have all been brought here today because of an interest in ensuring the protection of youth and elders suffocating under the weight of extreme student loan debt. One of the biggest champions of that cause is Senator James Sanders, the chairman of the Senate Banks Committee. Without further ado, I would like to introduce Senator James Sanders.
All right. Good morning. Good morning, all. Good morning, all. As you've heard, I am Senator James Sanders, but let me be clear with you. The people behind me are the most important. They are the people suffering under this debt, and they are a reflection of the people who are suffering under all of this debt that we need to do something about. But don't worry, help is on the way, right? At this side of me are some of the best champions of fighting this and other problems that America has. These folk have worked long and hard on this and other issues, and you will hear from them. But my friends, I assure you, while I have some role to play, they have the majority of the role to play. They have done the work, and I'm here to say that publicly. And I'll even put my glasses on and tell you that student loan debt is a $90 billion crisis that affects more than 2.4 million New Yorkers. 2.4 million New Yorkers. And is becoming considerably worse by the destructive policies of the Trump administration. Given the federal government's unwillingness or inability to protect student loan borrowers, evidenced by a scathing report released this past month by the U.S. Department of Education's own Inspector General, New York State must step in to protect the borrowers. The scale of this problem requires not only the licensing and regulatory measures to rein in bad actors, and indeed we shall, but programs on the ground from trusted nonprofits to assist New Yorkers, old and young alike, from rural and urban parts of our great state, who need the assistance in protecting their rights and unbiased advice so that they can make better decisions. We all have heard about people going to scammers, that they go in there and the scammers give them such bad information that it makes their problem worse. We're going to do something about that in New York State, and you'll hear more about that. Today, we are calling for $1 million in the budget. I remind you that our budget is approximately $198 billion, and we're asking for a mere $1 million in the budget to launch a student loan consumer assistance program. The Community Service Society has proposed a model that is modeled after its successful Community Health Advocates CHA program, a hub and spokes service approach in which a central live answer student debt hotline staffed by professionals and highly trained volunteers would be established as part of a network of CBOs in communities throughout the state. Notice that. Throughout the state. No, this is not just for New York City. This is not just for upstate. This is for everyone in the state, where borrowers who require additional in-person assistance can go. I would tell you more, but there are better voices to do it, including my colleague in government, Senator, our new colleague making an incredible splash, Senator Kevin Thomas.
Thank you, Senator.
The chairman of Consumer Affairs.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Senator Sanders, Assemblyman Zabrowski, who will join us shortly, and advocates. Just a few months ago, I worked as a consumer advocate for a civil legal services organization where I represented litigants sued over student loan debt. For almost a decade, I worked in the trenches and saw firsthand how student loan debt impacts the lives of New Yorkers. So, when the Education Department, headed by Betsy DeVos, and the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau started to dismantle offices and close their eyes to services doing harm to borrowers, I decided to run for office. Today, I am the state senator from District 6 and also the chairman of the Consumer Protection Committee. The General Accountability Office and the Inspector General's Office have both found systematic issues with loan servicers. For example, audits done by these agencies found 1. Loan servicers not servicing federally held student loans in accordance with the federal requirement, and the Department of Education was not holding them accountable. Loan servicers were also not providing all the information to the borrower when it comes to repayment options. These are just some of the non-compliance issues found, and given how the Trump administration is turning a blind eye to this, the state has to step up to protect New Yorkers. That is why I sponsored a bill to license student loan borrowers. This legislation would regulate loan servicers in New York by coupling licensing and enforcement measures. Absent the appropriate oversight mechanisms in place to hold student loan servicers accountable, they will continue to operate solely in the best interests of themselves. This bill, along with funding the Student Loan Consumer Assistance Program, will better protect the welfare of borrowers. Thank you.
All right. Keeping your promise, I see. Keeping your promise. But we're not alone in this. We have champions in the Assembly also, and including the chairman of the Banking Committee of the Assembly, Ken Zabrowski. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. It's great to be here today. I see that all the statistics have already been gone over, but it doesn't take really statistics to know that student loan debt and this student loan crisis is crippling families, crippling students across this state and really across the nation. And beyond, obviously, how incredibly damaging and the vast amount that this is, the fact of the matter is that oftentimes borrowers are actually being taken advantage of. They're not getting the right information, and when they do start to fall behind, they're actually sometimes pushed into alternatives that are not in their best interest. That's why we've been working on legislation, as the senator before me spoke about, that gives our regulators here in New York State the ability to protect New York borrowers. Because at the end of the day, when we talk to our constituents, they do not want to go down to Washington, D.C., certainly not within the current administration, to try to get their questions answered and try to get some relief. So we need to allow New York State to protect its borrowers. But at the same point, it is vitally important that folks get the answers to their questions and they get real advice when they start to fall behind, when life happens. And that's why this funding is critical. That's why we need to work together. That's why the Senate and the Assembly are standing together to get borrowers the help that they need. And I think we're going to get it done this year. So I want to thank all my partners behind me, especially my partners in the Senate, for working with us on this today. Thank you very much, everyone.
All right. We're going to get this done. Help is on the way to our borrowers. One of the people who's a personal hero of mine is the next person who's going to speak. This is a person, anytime that you hear about a problem or an issue that is affecting poor people and just good people in general, you will hear one name, and that name, of course, is one of the leading people who brought all of us together. And he is the president and the CEO of the Community Service Society. May I introduce you to David Jones.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you, Senators and Assemblyman Zabrowski. This is a very important day for us because we've been working on this issue for about 3 or 4 years. And basically, it first came to our attention through the work of some of our advisors who are helping people with various kinds of consumer debt. They began to have young and old people coming to them with one of the principal problems they had was they were loaded down with student debt. Many of them had not even completed a degree. They had dropped out, but were left with thousands of dollars in debt, which was crippling their ability not only to have the ability to go and rent an apartment or buy a house, but also even until they cured it, come back and go back to school. I think many of us understand. We were also getting elderly people coming to us who were suddenly presented with bills that they had co-signed for children and grandchildren, and they were being enforced against people who were on fixed income. All of these came together because we had already worked on a similar project involving the health of the state of New York. We became, in 1999, the Ombuds program for the state of New York for ACA, for Obamacare. And the similar kinds of problems had emerged for that community. We had literally tens of thousands of people who were having difficulty accessing the health care they were entitled to under ACA, who were being told they didn't have any rights when they in fact did, and were being told if they didn't like it, they could appeal. I don't know if many of you have been through appealing with a bureaucracy. I spent almost hours on the phone trying to convince somebody with my mother's problem with Medicare. She had aphasia. I was told she had to be put on the phone or else they wouldn't even consider her request. That is also the problem that's happening here. Generally, if you have a problem with your student debt, you were referred back to the for-profit institution that initially gave you your loan or have traded the loan. And basically, that institution is basically involved in a for-profit activity. So they have no real incentive to provide the kind of information about what could be done to either diminish the debt, extend it, or even wipe it out in some cases. All of this sort of came together with us when the Trump administration, and particularly DeVos, have systematically begun to roll back provisions that President Obama's administration had put in, which gave people some succor from what was going on. And then the last years, that was all confirmed, obviously, with the Department of Education's IG's report, which found that the loan servicers were not being policed by the federal government. Our program basically is based on our Consumer Health Advocate program that's been in place since 1999. It's already served 300,000 New Yorkers, and basically it is a hub and spoke system. You establish a hotline that is open for 5 days a week with professionals and highly trained volunteers, which make it cost effective, who can provide sort of frontline understanding to people about what their rights are, who they should talk to, and what they can do about it if they feel that they're being unfairly treated. That's the nexus. But to be a statewide program, which our health program is, we have to have partners throughout the state who can actually meet one-on-one with difficult problems. Someone who's in default and therefore has to get out of default, what can they do? Someone is entitled to relief because they're doing certain kinds of jobs, either in government or for not-for-profits. That's the other way that it can happen. So our idea here is basically to start the infrastructure that would build out so we can deal with the 2.4 million people in the state of New York who are basically with student loans, 10% of whom, at least based on national statistics, are actively in default. That's 240,000 people, a lot. And deal with this chronic problem and not expect Washington to save us. We see this program not only as important for those 2.4 million people, but also as a statement of what a state can do to fight back against this giveaway to predatory lenders. So we're very happy that we're getting this hearing. We think it's an important project, among our most important in our 175-year history. We've been around a long time, so people joke in my staff that I've been there from the beginning, and sometimes it feels that way. But we see this in line with some of our other major achievements, which included starting the Columbia School of Social Work, Hospital of Special Surgery, among others. So thank you, senators. Thank you, Assemblyman. This is an important day for us. We think it's an important day to show what New York State can do for its people. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. We are going to make a difference. Again, I draw your attention to the real heroes here, and those are these people behind us who are really saying that what they want to do is to contribute to the American society. They want to make a difference, and to make that difference, they want to make it without being saddled by debt that will force them into jobs that they won't be as productive, where they'll be worried about putting money into a system rather than contributing and making a better world. But when we speak of a better world, we'd have to, of course, speak of Senator Kavanaugh, who has been fighting on many issues, including this one. Senator.
Thank you very much, Senator. That was a very kind introduction. I wasn't actually expecting that punchline to lead to Brian Kavanaugh, but thank you. I'm Brian Kavanaugh. I represent the lower part of Manhattan and a big chunk of Brooklyn, and I had the great honor of formally chairing the Consumer Affairs Committee in the Assembly, and now I'm a proud member of the Consumer Affairs Committee here with our great new Senate chair. I just, student loans for a long time really were something that were a great benefit to many people trying to get on board with, the American dream, move forward and better themselves and build the skills they need to succeed. But increasingly, they've become a trap. People believe they need to go to college, they need to pay very large amounts of money for it, and they end up saddled with enormous amounts of debt. And we hear this, people in all parts of our state, people of very wide range of economic circumstances, even people who we consider relatively well off, are often saddled by enormous amounts of debt. And we have a banking industry and a federal regulatory system that just has not kept up. So, I work very closely with many organizations involved in the CHA, as it's called. If we call this the Student Loan Assistance Program, maybe we could have the SLA-CHA. But
We're gonna have to work it.
but we'll work on it. But it really is really a wonderful example of government putting modest amounts of resources in the hands of organizations that have the credibility on the ground, that have the expertise, and that work together across the state to make sure that all kinds of people all over the state have the resources and the advice they need to get through very difficult circumstances. It's terrific that we are considering expanding that model to student loans. It's great, the great work of CSS and David Jones, who's been around at least as long as I have been around, but has done much work in so many areas. I look forward to hearing today to discuss this further and learning more about how we can make a big difference through this approach. Thank you so much, and thank you for the leadership of our great chairs here today.
Yes, we are going to work at these names and try to get it together. Frederick Douglass said, "He who would be free must strike the first blow." We would be remiss if we did not hear from the students themselves. We would be remiss if they did not weigh in. They are the ones who got us all together, let's be clear. Their cries have not gone unanswered. They have been fought long and hard to make sure that we in these great places remember that there's some real people who are suffering at the end of this, needlessly suffering, and we're here to do something about it. But I'd rather you hear from them themselves. So I want to bring before you the vice president of the SUNY, I'm so used to CUNY, of the SUNY Student Assembly, Austin Ostro.
Thank you so much, Senator. So I'm proud to stand here representing the 1.4 million students of the State University of New York who are drowning in student debt. The average SUNY student graduates of about $25,000 in debt. Let me lay that out for you. I have colleagues at Upstate Medical Center, Downstate Medical Center, who are training to be our next generation of doctors, medical professionals who our society will count on. And in order to achieve that success, they need to indebt themselves to the tune of hundreds of thousands of dollars. That is too much of a weight for anyone to bear, let alone someone coming out of an academic program who is still getting their footing in society. I'd like to thank Senator Sanders, Senator Thomas, all of the supporters in the Assembly and Senate who care so much about this crisis and are willing to put action first to solve it. The crippling burden of student debt is a hard enough burden to bear for graduates, but to make the situation even worse, many of our loan servicers are not operating in good faith. In the last 5 years alone, millions of dollars have been paid in fines by top federal loan servicers, let alone the private loan servicers who abuse their authority over graduates. This is a situation that needs to be addressed, and graduates need to be given the resources they need to manage repayment responsibly. That is why the SUNY Student Assembly is proud to support and urge the legislature and governor to come together to include $1 million for the Community Service Society to create this program, to create this hotline, so that graduates, students can get the resources they need to make the wise decisions to set them up for future success. Thank you so much.
Thank you. My friends, I'm glad he doesn't live in my district. I would be worried. But I'm glad you're here. Now, again, my friends, we have seen some of the best fighters on this issue. And we're going to do a hearing that will take place in just a few minutes. And I encourage everyone to participate in that hearing. Again, I want to thank all of the students. I know that you took a day off, and, well, I won't tell. But I want to, of course, thank my colleague, the chair, who has an incredible burden at the state assembly level and is doing a magnificent job in it, let's be clear. And the other chair, who is new to all this burden. That's all right. We'll put our burden on him. He's new. Thank you. Always give it to the new guy. But one of the heroes, of course, is my personal hero, David Jones here. And with that, I'm going to see if there are any questions that we can answer. If they're tough, please give it to him. By the press, first things first. Yes, ma'am.
I'm a baby boomer. I went to college in the 70s. No debt. I never heard of anybody having debt. And then as the decades proceeded, more and more people were straddled with debt. 1.5 trillion, 44 million people.
Oh, you're making me the bad guy today.
And
Your question, ma'am.
my question is, why isn't the people who are running for office, why aren't they addressing it? Why did this become a prison for young people wanting upward mobility?
Why have we, let's widen that. Why have we as a society allowed our young people to be so straddled that many people often think it's a prison? I would suggest to you that, to some degree, we didn't look out for those who were coming after us. We failed, got busy in our day. We did not see the problem jumping up there, and finally, it has saddled so many. However, some people were on this early. The CSS and other groups were on this issue early, and finally have made a breakthrough at this great hall that we found ourselves in. Finally have made a breakthrough, and I say that we not take it a day any longer. It took a long time to get here, but it should not take much longer to deal with this. Are there any other questions? Yes, ma'am. A little louder. I can't hear in this ear, and this one is bad.
How do you think that New York is doing with programs to prevent debt in the first place, like Excelsior? Is there more the state can be doing, or how do you think that program is running?
I think that the Excelsior helps one group of students, and that's very good for that group of students. But there's a lot of other students that unfortunately are not helped. But you know what? This gives our governor something that he can work on. I believe that the governor wants to help all students, so I believe that we need to bring the next 2.0, Excelsior 2.0, where we can bring it to the governor and say, there was a couple of students you missed, and that's all right, we can get them right here. But even as we help prevent the debt, let us not forget those who have been saddled by the debt. Let us not forget those who have been so burdened that all they can think of is how they're living for the city instead of living to help create a better city. Another question. All right, it looks like we got a hearing to come to. Any final word? Sir, you got us here.
I think you raise an interesting question, and I've already been driving my staff crazy whether we should be asking every potential candidate for president what they're going to do about this crisis. I think it's time.
Not only the president, but also every member of Congress.
I think there's no question we're going to have to push it. And I think because this is one of the programs I love because it can't be identified as just serving one group. This transcends economic and racial lines in a way that very few programs do. The suffering we heard about for a medical student, which is actually having a deleterious effect in getting primary care in the United States, is basically because the debt is so huge, you have to go into a high-yield profession, and therefore primary care gets bumped out. So I think we have to have this discussion, and I think in any community we know about, you're going to find people who are suffering under this problem, certainly any part of the state of New York.
I'd be remiss if I didn't allow my fellow chairs to make any final statement that they wish. Chair Thomas.
Just to touch upon your question, we got here because of greed. All right. The student loan program, when it was created, was to get people out of poverty. Now we're putting them in there for years and decades. All right. So we are here now as a coalition to make sure we undo this. We make it better for those who are coming after us. And that's what we're hoping to do with our legislation and with this program, to start now, because we have to protect New York.
Chair Sobrowski.
Yeah, let me just say that I know student loan debt well. My wife and I pay an exorbitant amount of student loan debt. I've been out of law school for a long time now. I had to take a 30-year repayment plan in order to pay for law school and college. And this is a multifaceted problem and needs a multifaceted solution. What we're talking about today involves making sure that those with debt aren't taken advantage of. It gets even worse, right? They take the debt, and then as they have problems sort of paying it back, they're sort of taken advantage of by a lot of the servicers, don't have the advice necessary to even make those good decisions. But of course, another solution we need to find a problem to is the cost and the actual, dealing with the actual debt that students are taking on. So that's not lost on us.
Chair Zabrowski has recently become a father, and he wants to make sure his children are not saddled by this 30-year. My God, that hurts to hear. I want to thank everyone for being here, and I encourage everyone to come and enjoy the hearing as we bring some justice to New York State. Thank you very much.